Hello, how the devil are you all? Right, today I'm going to be talking about fairies, covering some research that I've been doing lately about the fairy realm and the fairies of the mythology of Ireland. Okay, so first of all, it seems like there's a lot more going on than we tend to give credit for. Um, we think of this world as black and white, true or false, all that kind of stuff, but there really is a lot of shades of grey. All right, and that's where the fairies fit in. They're not quite of this world, not quite of the next. They're sort of in between, and they can flitter between the two realms very easily. And there's two different aspects to why they do that, and I'll come to that shortly. All right, for those that don't know, we are recording this live on YouTube. Um, I think going forward, that's going to be the plan for the shows now. Obviously, they'll still get them as a podcast. If you listen to this on a podcast, it's still a podcast. But when we record them, we're going to try to record them live on YouTube. And then what we might do in future episodes is if anyone's got any questions about the episode we've done, then obviously we can answer them at the end of the show. So, something, just something different. But anyway, that's the plan. Obviously, we haven't been able to get together at all, and I'm doing this on my own for that very reason. Work's just been crazy, so sorry for the lack of shows. It's not that we don't want to do them. It's just that we just haven't had chance to do them. So there's things you can do to help us out, and I'll come on to them in a bit later. But first, let's start with what is a fairy. All right, so a lot of people, when you talk about fairies, a lot of people automatically go to the Tinkerbell, this little thing with wings flying around. And obviously there was them faked pictures that came out from the UK, which demonstrated these fairies at the bottom of the garden. You've probably all seen them, which turned out to be bullshit. And that's kind of where people go. But fairies can come in many different types, all right? And again, we call the realm of all these entities the kingdom of the Fae, all right? I call them the grey folk because the ones I've seen have been grey, but the fairy folk, the grey folk, the Fae, that's kind of what they are. What they look like is, you might depict them as a pixie. A leprechaun is obviously a very easily recognizable example of a fairy. Elves, brownies, similar. Dwarfs, gnomes. And then we come on to the extremes, if you like, the banshees, things like that. So, and again, banshees aren't always like the Grim Reaper, the skeleton in a veil type thing or a hood. They can be, but sometimes they can appear as normal people. All right, and there's an example of that way back in Ireland. There was I think I told it on the show before, but there was a couple of fellows just walking back from the pub. So it's late at night, and on the way back to the house, they passed a lady sitting brushing her hair. All right, one of the guys chanced his arm with this lady, and she was having none of it. All right, so he tried again, and again she's still now and none of it. And he basically, at that point, called her a rude name and wandered off, into the night. It was only his mate was pointing out that you shouldn't do that because you don't know who that person is, and it could be a banshee. All right. So he gets home, and then all of a sudden, there's a rattling on the door, and the windows are rattling, and the whole house is vibrating. And his mother's there, and she's saying, "What's going on?" So they tell her what happened, on the way home, and she says, "You've met the banshee." I should point out that he actually stole the comb off her, right? So she'd come back. The banshee had actually come for the comb. That's what was going on here. So all this, the house is vibrating, the windows are rattling, the doors are rattling. So the mother said, "Where's the comb?" And he presented it to her. So she took the comb, and she took some tongs from the fire. In the old days, they used to have the fire, then the tongs and the brushes and all that. She takes the tongs from the fire, and she holds these are wrought iron tongs, and she holds the comb in it, and she opens the door just a smidge, and she puts the comb outside, and there's the tongs rattle out of her hand, and she pulls them back inside and shuts the door. The comb's gone, and the wrought iron tongs are like twisted like a vine. And she said, if you'd gone outside, that's what happened to you. You know, you don't mess with a banshee, and that's an example of a banshee there. In England, in Lancaster, we have what's called basically goblin dogs. All right, and there's a farm in Lancashire where they used to have a particular, at a certain time of night, this dog would wander in and sit by the fire, and it was known as the goblin dog. And at that point, you would just leave it be. You wouldn't mess with it, because this is another way a fairy can present itself. This is the belief. Incidentally, in Ireland, they had similar goblin dogs tales there, where if a dog would wander in at a certain point of night or the night time, that would be your cue to leave. You'd put some food down, some water down for the dog. It'd normally kill it by the fire, and then you'd make your way to your bedroom, and you wouldn't come back down until the morning, and the goblin dog would be gone. All right, so that was another thing that just tended to happen fairly regular. But goblin dogs, lights is another examples of fairies, which we don't really talk too much about. The lights, or the orbs as people will call them now, the will-o'-the-wisp is what we have in the UK. And again, these have been, many examples have been given that these are swamp gas, or these are, there's actually a video online on YouTube, and if you go watch it, it's light. I don't know what you'd have to put in to get it, but I don't know, something like breaking granite light, something like that, and it might come up. But essentially, when you break granite, or friction between two pieces of granite, you get these balls of light that sort of spill out, and this sort of float around for a little while, mostly just like brief, really brief. But these are small amounts of granite. If you imagine a bigger amount of granite, it might produce a bigger light. So there might be an explanation for these lights, but not all of them. Swamp gas, that's another theory, and that explains a few, but not all. Was it 1967? A ball of glowing light was seen over an Air Force base, and it was dripping. It's said to be dripping like molten metal from it, and it basically hovered around the base and shut down various missile silos and etc. etc. That was Maelstrom Air Force Base. I think 1980 there was a base in the UK that was basically the same thing happened there, and then obviously the now sort of legendary Rendlesham was 1980 as well. Same thing happened there. This ball of light came in, was seen going through the woods by the base commander. She was out there, she saw it. Incidentally, if you listen to Gary Esseltine, she's the base commander that night. Has basically never been seen again, never spoke about it. I know he's doing a film on it, so I don't know if he's managed to contact her or not, but the events that happened that night was enough to make her say, that's enough for me, and go. All right, so this ball of light came in, and again, this ball of light was zipping through the trees. It had an intention, it was going somewhere, it knew where it was going. That's not swamp gas, that's something else. And again, in the old days, before these sort of pagan beliefs, before Christianity got its teeth into things, because Christianity would say this is all superstition, and then it replaced this superstition with its own brand of superstition. All right, but that's basically what put way to the fairies in the United Kingdom at that point. Was Christianity didn't want to know. Incidentally, in Scandinavia, they believe very much the same in these fairies, or they're given different names. And it was tradition at a certain point of year in Scandinavia to put an offering out behind the back of your house. You put an offer out, whether that was butter or cheese or whatever it was, to appease the fairy folk. All right, so that's a brief introduction to fairies. And again, like I said before, will-o'-the-wisp is something we have here. There's Black Annis in Leicester. She comes across as more or less a witch, is what you'd say. But that's believed to be, some sort of fairy. Again, here's one, 1962, a Somerset farmer. All right, so this is Berkshire Downs, and what happened with this lady is she was a farmer. She knew the land. Her ancestors grew up in the area. She'd been there all her life, and she was tending to normal duties. And all of a sudden, she finds herself in a strange location. It was still fields and forest and all that, but she just couldn't place where she was. She started getting a bit, nervous, a bit anxious, and she started following a trail. Now, she followed this trail, and on this trail, there was a little man dressed in green. All right, so, you're thinking leprechaun. That's kind of what you're thinking here. That's what she saw. All right, so this little man in green knew her by name. She was obviously worried at this point, and she was calling out to this man if he could help her. She was looking for any sort of help, and this little man said he could help her. All right, so he asked her to follow him, took her by the hand, and led her through this hedgerow. When she came out on the other side, she was back in the field that she knew, she'd known all her life. She turned to thank the guy, and he'd gone. All right, so this is an example of a fairy helping someone. They don't always take you. All right. A lot of times they do, but there is two schools of thought or two courts of fairies, good and bad. And I'll come on to that, in a minute or so. As an example here, a woman on a holiday in Cornwall with her daughter came across a small man in green with pointed hood and ears. They were so alarmed they ran for the ferry, cold with terror. Another eyewitness account in the 20th century says basically the same thing. So do you believe? So you've got, like I say there, a few examples of the same creatures being seen in the same locations by, people from varying degrees, different degrees of life and etc., etc. We know nothing about it. Okay, so then we come on to the rules. There's rules of engagement when you talk about fairies, things you should do and things you shouldn't do. All right, so we'll just go through them here so you can, in case you encounter one, you know what to do. Be polite, all right? So don't insult or interrupt. That's very important. Don't do anything that can offend the fae, okay? This rule sort of blends into a couple of the other rules, but we'll get to them. So basically, do everything in your power not to offend the fae. All right, iron is both poisonous to the fae, and if it's shaped iron, it can be offensive to them. So you best to leave iron out in the garden or areas of the home if you don't want the fae to interact with you even. All right, and then obviously the example that we're probably most familiar with this and probably don't know why is the horseshoe. All right, so you'll often see, particularly in England, I don't know about other countries, but in England and Ireland, I presume, there'll be houses and they'll have a horseshoe on the wall. Now it's said to bring you good luck. I said that's what nowadays people will put it on the wall and they'd think it was good luck. What it was actually doing, it's a piece of iron on your property is essentially keeping the fairies away. That's what the horseshoe was for. So if you see that horseshoe, again, people probably don't know what it's for. They probably just associate it with good luck and don't realise that it was actually, warning off these entities. Incidentally, the shaped iron. Again, this crops up in religious context when you see people who are possessed and all this thing, and then they bring sort of forth a crucifix or something, and generally that is maybe a metal object. Doesn't have to be, but an object that holds intent, right? So someone who's possessed, let's say somebody in, I don't know, the Middle East is possessed, yeah, and a Christian or Catholic priest goes in there to remove this spirit, right? He will take his crucifix, his rosary beads, all that sort of stuff, and that will do the job because it's not really necessarily about the religious iconography. It's all about the intent that's put on the object, and in this case, it would be the crucifix. But for this case, we're talking about the horseshoe. So as long as you know what it's there for, then it'll do the job. But iron is key. And again, people used to wear a lot of iron and stuff like that. So that's another thing. be interesting, wouldn't it, if you could look up the missing 411, because this sort of rolls into missing 411 a little bit. You know, where people go missing, the Dave Plaidy stuff. Fantastic. You know, watched all the movies. I watched the latest one, which was the UFO connection. That was amazing. There's a couple of bits in it that didn't make sense to me. Just storyline wise, I couldn't really get my head around it. And I watched it a few times and I still couldn't get my head around certain things that happened in certain orders. But apart from that, that's just, you know, little, you know, but maybe a little bit sad on my end. But apart from that, the movie was great. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, if you know, if Iron would have played a part. Although some people do go missing with weapons, don't they? So you would assume they were Iron. But hey ho, here we go. So where do we get to? So that's that. So the fail of gifts. All right, this can be anything. That's sweet. Honey is, you know, an obvious thing. Obviously, back nowadays you'd say sweets, things like that, but didn't have them. So gems, crystals. That's another thing they like, and other foods. Basically, real foods. All right, not processed things like that. Real foods like cheeses, your milks, you know, your wheats, that sort of stuff. Incidentally, it was commonplace in England up till fairly recently to leave a section of a field unharvested, and that was for, and I think they do this in certain states in America as well, or did, and that was for the Fae. All right, so they'd harvest, you know, 99% of the field and just leave 1% for the Fae, and that was just to appease them. But that was a good harvest, things like that. Again, that comes back to superstition, but hey, don't do it and see what happens. Obviously, time spent with the Fae is very different to time in our reality. So, you know, you might spend a couple of minutes with them, come back in our reality, and 2-3 months have passed. I'll probably go on to an example of a case in a minute, which will sort of show that. Never say, I'm sorry to the Fae, right? Instead, say, my apologies or pardon me. This rule and the same rule with the next one. Never say thank you to the Fae. Instead, you could say things like, you are most kind, or I appreciate. Those sorts of things. You never want to directly say thank you or say sorry to them, because they'll take, what they'll do is they'll use your words and they'll manipulate what you've said, essentially. And that's the way they trick you. I mean, that's what they're for, tricking you. When speaking to the Fae, listen very carefully, because often there is much they are saying that is unsaid. All right, so read between the lines. Again, this is the way they trick you. They'll sort of say something that sounds plausible, but if you actually think about what they're saying, it's a trick. Never touch the food, never touch the water, even if they, you know, implicitly ask you to. You know, I've had this experience myself, but never take what's on offer, unless you're really fed up with this life, and then crack on. Okay, what's the next one? So the Fae protect the earth, so make sure you do your part to keep it healthy and clean. And this doesn't mean bucking carbon before you go on that ship. No, this just means maintain, you know, maintain places. So if you're a farmer, you look after the land. You don't. I mean, farmers do anyway. They have to look after the land. That's the whole point of thing. But it's just keeping everything in balance, essentially. Not too much of one thing and that. Again, many cultures around the world that deal with, they'll call them elves or dwarves or things like that. They're essentially Fae. They will leave places intact. So say they're building a road in Scandinavia, is quite, you know, famous for this. If they're building a road and there's a fairy mound, they will actually take the road around it rather than disturb the fairy mound. And again, it's just something to be aware of. Just be careful. We see this, don't we? And we see this in poltergeist activity and things like this. You know, ghosts will get like a house where people do start doing renovation, and that will cause the spirits to we say spirits, that also cause the spirits to start acting up, and it's the act of renovation that's causing the issue. Again, going back to what the ancient people was talking about when they was talking about the fate, it's a similar thing. If you start messing with things, that can draw them out. So we say spirits now, but we're probably talking about the fae. Again, they can be unseen. They are tricksters. The brownies and things like that, they are tricksters. They'll do housework for you. If you leave housework out, this is what's said. They could do housework for you back in the day. This is before, when people used to live in balance with the fae. It was a very different sort of world. And say, like, growing Christianity came along and it changed people's relationship with the fae. And it's never, I don't know if it'll ever go back, but they used to be a lot more present then than they are now. If you believe what you're reading in the ancient texts, there's stories of, like, I don't know, the Vikings or the Romans going to Ireland and seeing leprechauns. They were not, I'm not going to say commonplace, but there was more common than they are today. I know people are still seeing them, every now and again, but they were seeing them a lot more often. And the balance has changed. Whether that's them just deciding that, or whether it was something we was doing, whatever it is, they don't like it. Whether it's the, I don't know, nowadays you could say it's the electromagnetic field that's all around us, with the Wi-Fi. Maybe they don't like that. I don't know. But something's putting them off coming to see us. And, they could say that's a good thing. I'll let you decide. Let's have a look. So, if you find yourself on a walkabout and you have a foreboding sense of being watched or unwelcome, leave immediately. All right. Again, if you've listened to any of the 411 stuff, they apply this there. Lots of people, before something happens, they'll get this sense of, this gut feeling of something's watching me. This crops up in a lot of Bigfoot cases, actually. Things like that. I mean, well, alleged Bigfoot, we should say, because they don't always see the creature, but it's assumed that they're in the same area as the one. Maybe some other things have happened, like howls, wood knocks, whatever. But essentially, you'll get the feeling that you're being watched, and then all of a sudden, nothing, right? So listen to that. I've spoke to people that have been in this situation where they've got this sense of foreboding, and they've left. They've always left. They're not stuck around. Do I know any cases where people stayed? I know one case where there was 3 guys. This is just up the road, and they were in a camping location. They were spending the night there, and one of the guys, they were all outdoorsmen, been doing it a long time, so no reason to be upset or anything like that. And one guy just got an overwhelming sense of fear from this place, and he wanted to leave. And he told the other 2 guys, he did the usual thing like a bloke would do. He ignored it for a while, but this sense just wasn't going away, and he started to get nauseous and all that. So he did tell his other 2 companions, look, I think we should go. And they said, don't be silly, they were feeling fine, so they was just saying, look, there's something wrong with you, but you'll get over it. Just have a couple of beers or whatever. And he against his better wishes, he decided to stay. And then that night they were by the campfire, and then they saw these 2 amber eyes. I think at ground level initially, and then when they started to point them out, they stood up. I think it was about 5 foot off the ground, and just watched them. And again, then the other 2 lads got this sense as well. And he was saying, like, let's pack up and go. But it was the middle of the night, so there was like, it's just too dangerous to leave at this point. So I think there was in a slight ravine. Anyway, they stayed, and this thing watched them for hours, just toying with them. And they shone the light on it, that sort of thing. And it was, what we call a werewolf, essentially, or dog man. But they got the sense to leave and didn't act on it. And again, it's difficult if you've planned to go somewhere and you're excited to be there and all that, and then you get this feeling, I can understand why you wouldn't want to leave, right? But just bear it in mind. That's what I'm saying. Just bear it in mind. Okay, so the fairies always keeps its promise, right? although rarely they'll make a promise. Okay, but if they do, they will stick to it. You know, the word is their honor, so to speak. And it is said that they will keep a promise even if it means their own death. Right. So they won't go back on a promise. That's why they don't offer promises, essentially. Be wary of any agreement made with the Fae, and remember that they are masters of manipulation. And like I said before, you've got to be so careful what they've said, because there will be loopholes, right, in that statement that they've made, and you've got to really think about it before you answer. I'm saying if you encounter them, I know most people, everybody probably listening to this will never have been in this situation, but just in case. All right, so that's essentially the rules of engagement, if you like, with a Fae. We know that they'll often play music, those sorts of things, to lure you into the forest. And then you'll go into the forest, maybe a baby crying. You'll go into the forest and then there'll be a bounty put before you. Don't eat from it, don't drink from it. There's a bit more to cover on this, but I'm going to call this part 1. I think I'm going to do another part, part 2 on this. And I'm going to go into the courts, and I'm going to go into an example case of this. I just wanted to get this out there today because I wanted to test this YouTube setup and things like that. See if it's plausible to take this file and put it as a podcast, and also just get your engagement. See if you want to join us on YouTube. What we'll have to do is announce when we're going and probably give you a heads up and try and keep to the same schedule, although that's almost impossible. But if we can give you, I don't know, a couple of days warning, and then maybe an hour's warning or a couple of hours warning before we go on, that sort of thing. I don't know. You tell me. You know how to get hold of us on Facebook. Join the Facebook group if you're not already, Bizarre Tales Podcast, or supernaturalpod@gmail.com. Join us. Again, like I said before, I'm going to give you one more. I'll give you one more case before I go. But like I said before, we are struggling to get these shows out just because of time constraints at work. So there are things you can do to help us, and some of them are, getting off your ass. I know that's difficult for a lot of people these days, but I know you guys are pretty good to us. So if you can, then check out our website for the t-shirts. I'm wearing one here if you're watching on YouTube. I think this will be uploaded to YouTube, so people can watch it for, forever essentially. But yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, then this is one of our t-shirts that we do. We do many different designs for boys, for girls. So go and check them out. There's pretty much something there for everyone. The actual t-shirt quality is amazing. Yes, it is a little bit, more on the expensive side for a t-shirt, but if you actually wear the t-shirt, you'll enjoy it. So it is one of them. It's all repurposed cotton and things like that, so it's all eco-friendly and all that stuff. So keeping in way with a Fae, eh? So yeah, go and check the t-shirts out. There's a link in the description. If you go onto the Bizarre Tales podcast group on Facebook, there'll be a link there, things like that. So many ways, and that helps us. But if you don't want to get off your ass and you're that lazy, you can't even help us out, but you listen to the content, then other things you can do is subscribe. If you can subscribe on multiple different platforms, again, you're only listening to us once, but if you subscribe to us on multiple different platforms, that helps the algorithm. All right, so that's something you can do without even, getting off your ass, so to speak. So it would appreciate you if you helped us out with the t-shirts, because obviously that allows us more freedom to do what we need to do and get these shows out. Not work 24/7. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so another example of that, going back to that missing 411 kind of connection thing, if there is one, it's maybe dubious at best, but there's an example of 2 shepherds back in Ireland, and this would be like the 17th century or so, and they'd been tending to the fields. They're walking back down a path towards home, and they hear this music playing from a copse of trees, just up the way there, and they hear this music and laughter and singing, and one of the guys like, let's go and check it out, sounds really good. And the other fella just recently married, All right, so he was called Tom. So he said to Dick, he said, "No, I can't." He said, "You know, my new wife will kill me if I don't come back in time." So Dick says, "Well, I'm going to go. Do you mind if I go?" And he says, "No, of course. Go and knock yourself out." So off he goes, and he says, "I'll catch you up later." So he goes off to see what there's going on over there. And Tom goes home. So Tom goes home, tells his wife. She says, "Where's Dick?" And he says, "Oh, he's gone to this party in the woods." So he says, "Okay, but he's coming later. He'll catch us up later." Anyway, that night passed, and Tom never arrived home. He didn't arrive. So Dick didn't arrive home that night, and he didn't arrive for work the next day either. And a couple of days went past, and he never turned up. So the locals were getting pretty anxious. What's happened to Dick? So they told the local police force. They went out to investigate, and couldn't find no tracks of him, no sign of him. So they arrested Tom because he was the last person to have any contact with him. He was seen with him just before he left to go home. So he was the last person that was seen with him. So essentially they arrested him for his murder. Rumours were going around the town. You can imagine that he'd done something, that sort of thing. So he was arrested and he was incarcerated in a local jail. Now his wife, or his new wife, knew this wasn't the case. Well, she believed her husband, so she started asking around the village, if anyone could help her prove his innocence. And one of the locals said, "You might need to talk to this wise man that lives on the edge of the village. He might have some idea what's going on here." So she did. So she went up there and sought him out and told him what had happened. And he listened, and he said, "This is the work of the Fae." And she was saying, "What do you mean?" And he was telling her that they can take people like this, they'll trick people with music and song and things like that. So you'll want to go, you gravitate towards it. As soon as you're there, you'll maybe take a piece of food or a drink, or they'll offer you, they'll say something, and then you sort of become contractually obliged to stay. So she said, "Well, what can we do?" And he said, "We have to wait a year and a day." All right, a year and a day. So this crops up at many of these tales. You'll see this 1 year and a day cropping up, and there's other examples that I might give you on part 2. But so a year and a day to the day he went away, the wife met this wise man, and they went to the spot where he'd been seen last. And they themselves heard this music and the laughter coming from this woods. So they walked over there, and as they went into the woods, they saw this bright light and beautiful sunshine day, and these people dancing like in the Ring a Ring Rosie type dance and dancing around, and they saw Dick there laughing and going along with it, and the wise man run over and pulled Dick out of the circle, and they fell on the floor. And Dick was saying, "What what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm enjoying myself with these ladies and all that." And the wise man said, "No, they're not ladies, they're fairies." And he was saying, "Nah, nah." And he wanted to go back to the circle. And he said, "No, no." And the wife came over and she said, "Look," she told him that her husband was in jail, that believed he was murdered. And he'd been missing for a year. And he was saying, "No, no, I haven't. It's, look at the sky. It's still sun. It's just how I left when I left Tom. This is how he left, summer's night." And they said, "No, it's a year to the day." And he just couldn't accept it. And eventually, he sort of realized that they was probably right. So they left the things. The fairies were beckoning him back, obviously trying to get him back, but he wouldn't go. He went with these people, and they went to the local police station, presented himself. Obviously, he's not dead, so they had to release Tom. So, a year and a day, and that's the only time. If you miss that, the year and a day, it's over. Right? He's gone for good. He's become part of the fairy kingdom. But again, for him, only 15 minutes had passed, but a year and a day had passed in our reality. So that speaks of this this time difference, that this control of this realm that they're in, or whatever. Very different to our understanding of of nature and laws and things like that. So, who's the masters of this reality? The Black Sabbath album, innit? But yeah, who's the masters of this reality, really, when you think about things like that? So I'll leave it there for part 1. I'll probably record part 2 some point this week, and I'll give you another couple of examples of people that got themselves in situations with the Fae. But that's been it for now. So let me know if this is the way you would like us to do it, if you want to join us on YouTube. And again, if people ask questions, then we will be able to answer them. So that'll be something different, just something different on to offer to you. Like I said before, if you can help us out, please help us out. Check out the t-shirts. I'm sure there's something there for everyone, believe me. And if there's something in there that you'd like to see on a different colour or whatever, then just message me and I can sort that for you. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you on the other side.